For 60 years, a man stole children to stay young and wealthy, and nobody suspected him, because everyone believed the same thing. Evil only ever looked like a woman. The village of Hollow Fen had buried more children than it had christened, and every time they blamed a woman, some old woman who lived alone, some widow who kept to herself, some girl who knew too much about herbs and didn't know when to keep quiet. They burned 3 women in 3 years, and still every full moon, another cradle turned up empty. Another child's footprints just stopped at the edge of the trees. No one thought to look at Josiah Vane. He was the town's favorite person, a rich merchant who hadn't aged a day in 20 years. His skin looked strange, too, smooth, almost glowing. His back never bent with age. He was on his 4th wife, always young, always beautiful. The last one always moving on, a few years in, nobody asking too many questions. He paid for the church roof. He paid for the town well. Everyone said God must love him. How else could one man stay so rich, so young, so loved, in a village drowning in grief? The truth was much simpler. He was a monster, wearing a rich man's face. Under his cellar, behind a wall he'd built with his own hands 60 years earlier, in a different town, under a different name, Josiah kept his secret. Rows of small white cradles, each one holding what was left of a stolen child. He hadn't taken their blood. He'd taken their years. 200 years ago, he'd learned the trick from an old alchemist, right before he killed him for it. Take a child's whole unlived future, and you can turn it into youth for yourself. A stolen baby could buy him another 20 years of looking 30. And because the whole region believed evil only wore a woman's face, no one looked twice at the generous, handsome, forever young man funding their church, while their own mothers and grandmothers burned in the square for something they never did. Then, one gray morning, a stranger walked into town, a prophetess wrapped in a cloak the color of raw wool, and Hollow Fen, desperate for any kind of hope, welcomed her like family. Her name was Sister Merode. People already knew her name before she arrived. She was the woman who once stopped a famine up north by praying down rain. People said God spoke to her the way birds sing easily, constantly. She hadn't come by chance. For months, she'd heard crying in her prayers. Not the living, the dead. Women who'd been killed for a crime they didn't commit, begging for someone to finally tell the truth. God had shown her a shape in a dream. Not an old woman, a tall man, standing still, while somewhere nearby, children screamed. The village gave her their best food and their darkest secret in the same breath. She asked for one simple thing: let her walk among them, sit with the grieving, pray at the graves, and actually look at what had been happening, not just guess. They were too tired to say no. She didn't start with the accused women. She started with the church roof Josiah had paid for. She admired it, asked who'd been so generous. She drank from the well he'd funded, thanked God for such a kind man. She let him take her to dinner 3 nights in a row. sat across from his strange, ageless face, smiled, listened, and underneath that smile, she was doing exactly what she came to do, watching. She noticed his young wife wouldn't meet her eyes. She noticed his cellar door had a lock far too heavy for wine bottles. She noticed something else. Too, his blessed youth lined up almost exactly with every disappearance the village had ever recorded. Records she'd asked to see. For her prayers, she said, and they'd handed them over without a second thought. On the 7th night, she told the village she needed to pray alone. Instead, she walked straight to his house. She found his newest wife, barely 20, already looking hollow, and asked her one question. "What's behind the false wall in your cellar?" The girl broke down immediately. She'd suspected for a year. She'd been too scared to say anything, because everyone knew what happened to women who talked. What happened next wasn't a mob with torches. Murad made sure of that. She'd already watched this village kill on nothing but rumors. She wasn't going to let it happen again, not even to a guilty man. Instead, she brought the elders, the priest, the magistrate, and made them break down that wall themselves, in daylight, in front of witnesses. What they found broke the whole village. Dozens of small, white cradles, each one holding what was left of a child taken over 60 years, across 3 different towns, under 3 different names, long before Josiah ever came to Hollow Fen. And ledgers, neat, careful records of every child, every date, every year he'd stolen. A killer's accounting book, as tidy as any businessman's. Josiah didn't even try to deny it. And the moment the truth came out, so did his age. Murad explained it simply. His power was never really magic. It was trust. Every year he'd stolen only worked because no one was watching closely enough to stop him. The second, the whole village turned its eyes on him instead of away from him, it all fell apart. Within days, his face aged 200 years at once. His skin sagged. His back curved. Whatever youth he'd been wearing just peeled away. The village didn't know how to feel. They'd killed 9 women in 10 years for a crime committed. The whole time by the man who paid for their church roof, who sat at their table, who they thought God had blessed. Murad didn't let them look away from that either. She stood in the same square where they'd once burned innocent women, and told them plainly, their fear had always been pointed at the wrong people, at the old, the alone, the women who didn't fit in, while real danger sat at their dinner table, smiling, wearing money and charm like a disguise. You were taught to fear the wrong shape, she said, and he knew it. He used it. Every woman you killed to feel safe just kept him alive longer. There was no easy way to make that right. But the village tried. They built monuments for the murdered women. They passed a new law. No witchcraft accusation could stand without real evidence, checked by 3 judges. They set aside a day every year to say the stolen children's names out loud, so they'd never be forgotten again. Josiah Vane was tried, not by an angry mob, but by the same court that once condemned innocent women. Murad made sure of that too. It felt right to her. Let the system that failed those women be the one to finally get it right. He was executed at his true age, older than anyone in Hollow Fen had ever seen a man live to be, and they dug up the whole orchard beneath his house. Every cradle was given a real grave and a real name, finally turned back from numbers in a ledger into children. Murad stayed just long enough to see the last child properly buried. Before she left, one of the elders asked how she'd known, how she'd looked past the frightened old women everyone else had, already condemned, straight to the rich, beloved man no one suspected. She said, "Evil doesn't hide where you're already looking. It hides where you've agreed never to look at all."